right now. So we'll keep this we're going to record this throughout, and then we will post it on our website afterwards so that other folks can access it. A version of these slides, or excuse me, a PDF version of these slides is going to be posted on the NEMA website after this is finished. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump in. So today we're going to cover 2 funding opportunities. These are FEMA grants available for 2021. First, we're going to talk about flood mitigation assistance, which is managed by the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources, and Katie Ringling from DNR is going to talk about that. And then we'll move on to the Building Resilient Infrastructure and in Communities grants, which is covered by the NEMA Hazard Mitigation team. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Katie to start the FMA brief.
Thanks, John. So I'm Katie Ringling. I'm with the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources, and we administer the Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant. As John mentioned, there's 3 grants under hazard mitigation, and NEMA manages 2 of them, and then we manage this one. And so we work very close together in looking at all the applications for these grants, and we kind of sort them out and determine which one they best fit under. Go ahead, John. Thanks. So the Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant is really to provide federal funds to state, local, and tribal governments to reduce or eliminate the risk of repetitive loss damage to buildings and structures insured under the National Flood Insurance Program. And I want to point that out. The big point of the Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant is to target those structures that are insured under the National Flood Insurance Program. And the reason for that is that we want to bring down those claims that are going. And so that is the big part of FMA. And you're going to see that repeated throughout this presentation. Go ahead, John. So FMA is awarded yearly. It's completely nationally competitive. So there's no allocation for the state in this grant. It is just all national level. The total funds is determined by Congress on a yearly basis. The applicant for the state of Nebraska is DNR, and then the sub-applicants would be the state and local governments that sub-apply underneath us. Go ahead. So this year in the Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant, we have $160 million available. And as you can see, there's different pots for it. So the first pot is $10 million can go to scoping projects, and I'll talk about these individually here in a minute. Up to $70 million would go to the community flood mitigation projects, and then whatever's left in those 2 pots plus the $80 million will go in that 3rd pot there. That includes the flood hazard mitigation planning and the individual flood mitigation projects. Go ahead. So sub-applicant eligibility. You must be a local government. It includes cities, villages, counties, special district governments, tribal governments. The big thing with this one is you have to be participating and in good standing with the NFIP. And in Nebraska, that means that you cannot have an open community assistance visit or an open community assistance contact. For FEMA, this means that you cannot be withdrawn on probation or suspended from the program. So you also have to have a FEMA approved local hazard mitigation plan. And then you must also demonstrate that you can provide the 25% non-federal cost share. And last but not least, in order to get in this round, I need you to be able to submit a notice of interest to NEMA by September 10th, 2021. All of those that are submitted on the 10th will be prioritized first. We will allow late submissions through October 1st. And if there's anything available after that, we will prioritize the 2nd round of applications. Keep going. So as I said, there's 5 projects, eligible projects under FMA. This slide, I really just want to point out that that technical assistance category is only available to NDNR. So I'm not going to talk about that one in depth today. Go ahead, John. So scoping is to really develop a community flood mitigation project or an individual flood mitigation project. And again, it has to reduce flood claims against the NFIP. So you're going to, like I said, keep saying it, that's the important piece here. These projects include conducting meetings, outreach, benefit cost analysis, engineering feasibility studies, cost share strategies for programs, and identifying mitigation actions for specific facilities as well. Go on. So this one, there is an exceedance of 300,000 for scoping individual flood mitigation projects and a not to exceed of 900,000 for those community flood mitigation projects. They must also prove, all applicants must approve that the future project will benefit NFIP insured structures. And so with this, you're required to provide a map and the geospatial files that are included to make that map. And FEMA has some very specific guidance out on how to do this. And so I have that linked on my webpage, and I'll show you where that link is later. I'm not going to go into it today because it's pretty specific, but when we get to that point, we can pull that out. Go on. So how are they going to be scored? So the first thing is NFIP insured multiple loss communities will get 200 points. And so this is a community that has 50 or more repetitive loss or severely repetitive loss structures and has received individual assistance declaration in the last 10 years. The next piece would be a private partnership cost share. And this is up to 150 points. And this is really for the private part of the non-federal match. So if you had another partner other than just the city, it could be the local homeowner, it could be a nonprofit that's providing some of that match, then you'll get points for that up to the percentage of your match that they're contributing to. Go on. If your community is part of the community rating system, you will get points determined by what class you're in. If you're a class 10, you'll get 10 points. If you're a class 1, you'll get 100 points. And then it just moves down the classes from there. If your community is part of the Cooperative Technical Partners Program with FEMA, you'll get another 30 points. And then new to this year is the CDC Social Vulnerability Index points. If your project area has a score that equals or exceeds 0.75 for the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, you'll get 200 points. And that's a hard number. So you're either at 0.75 or above to get those. If you're at 0.74, you don't get those points. Go on, John. So the second type of project is the Community Flood Mitigation Project. And again, these are for flood risk for the purpose of reducing claims under the National Flood Insurance Program. And you must demonstrate that. It includes localized flood control, water storage and diversion, restoration of wetlands and floodplains, stormwater management, and the projects alike. Go on. Sub-applicants cannot exceed 30 million in total federal cost share. And all projects, again, must prove that they benefit the NFIP insured structures. And then last but not least, you must have a PCA equal or greater than 1 using FEMA's benefit cost analysis software. So this one includes all of the scoring criteria that we just talked about under project scoping. So that was the NFIP insured multiple loss. That was the 50 or more repetitive loss or severely repetitive loss structures, plus the individual assistance in the last 10 years. It includes the private partnership, the CRS, the CTP, and the CDC Social Vulnerability Index as well. On top of that, if you have any NFIP policy holders in the area, you get 2 points per policy. For each SRRL property, you get 10 points. For each repetitive loss property in the area, you get 5 points. If it was previously an advanced assistance or it had project scoping under any of the HMA grants, you can get 20 points for that as well. Go on, John. And then new this year is this consideration of climate change or other future conditions or incorporation of nature-based solutions. And this one's 200 points. So they're looking for projects that address sea level rise, increased rainfall, increased likelihood of flash flood due to wildfire and such type of things, including like population, demographics, land use changes. Anything that's that rolling change that changes the way the conditions or the climate is moving. And on the other side of that, they're also considering extra points for those nature-based solutions. So these are going to be also called green infrastructure, but they're designs that use natural features or processes that are included within the project to provide that really resiliency for the community. Go on. So the third bucket is the flood hazard mitigation planning, and this one's pretty simple. We can only apply for each state up to 100,000. So this is a really small bucket of money. The state, in which Nebraska right now is not planning on, could only ask for about 50, and then the local governments could ask for 25,000. And this is just for the flood component of your hazard mitigation planning. It can be a standalone, or it can be part of your all inclusive plan as well. Go on, John. And the last bucket is the individual flood mitigation project. And these are your acquisitions, structure demolition, relocation, structure elevations, and you can read on dry flood proofing and all those. This one is really special, move on, John, in that they have very specific criteria that they're looking for. And so the first thing they're prioritizing are those severely repetitive loss structures defined under B2. And these have 2 separate NFIP claims that the cumulative amount of them exceeds the market value of the insured structure. And so if your project area, you look at all the structures you have included, if 50% of them are in this category, it will be prioritized first. Go on, John. Second, they're prioritizing repetitive loss properties. And these ones have flood-related damage on 2 occasions in which the cost of repair on average equal or exceeded 25% of the market value of the structure. And again, if 50% of the structures in your application meet this, then you will be prioritized second. Go ahead. And then last but not least, the SRRL B1 definition, which is 4 claims, 4 separate NFIP claims that have been made, each exceeding 500,000 with the cumulative amount of claims exceeding 20,000. And again, if you have 50% of your structures in your application that have this, then you would be prioritized third. Go ahead. So if your project doesn't fit in those 3, then it'll fall under their criteria for prioritizing the rest of the projects. And so in here, they're looking still at that SRRL and RL properties. It's a big, big thing for FEMA. They want to get rid of those properties because they're the ones that are constantly putting in claims, right? So if you are greater than 35% in your application for those structures, you're still going to get 40 points. If you're between 25 and 35%, you're going to get 10 points for those. Go on, John. They're also looking at substantial damage. So if it's a structure that's been determined to be substantially damaged within the last 2 years, you'll get 10 points for each of those. They also want to get rid of primary residence. So if less than 25% of your application is secondary, you'll get 10 points. And then again, they're focusing in on that vulnerability stuff. And so the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, they want you to look at each structure individually, what their SVI score is. You'll average them. If your average score is 0, you get 0 points. If your average score is 1, you'd get the full 40. And then it's a ladder between those 2 based on your score. Go on. The most important thing to note are these right here. So all structures in your application have to be located in the special flood hazard area. This grant doesn't buy out any other structures other than the ones that are in that zone. So this would be your zone A, AE. Those are the ones that we're looking at there. Structures have to be identified, or structures identified have to be, let me rephrase that, sorry. Structures that are in your application must have an NFIP policy in force at the opening of the application, which is September 30th. And they have to keep that insurance all the way through the lifetime of the structure. So just because they get a grant to have that acquired doesn't mean they can drop that. They have to wait to drop it until the structure has been demolished. And then they also have to have a benefit cost ratio of 1 or more. The good thing with this is there's some pre-calculated benefits. So if your structure is, your elevation project is 175,000 or less, it already qualifies for this. And if your acquisition project is 276,000 or less, it already qualifies. And then one of the most attractive things about FMA is this improved cross share based on your structure. So if your structure is considered a severe repetitive loss structure under that B1 or that B2, FEMA will pay up to 100% of that project. And then if you are a repetitive loss structure, it'll pay up to 90%. So those are some things to remember. However, to get those increased cost shares, you need to have all the documentation ready at the time of application. Go on, John. So that was the quick and dirty. There is more information there at our website, and all of the links are there. There's several help guides. The NOFO from FEMA is there. And then I will also put up the slides from this presentation on there as well. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Lexi now.
Thank you, Katie. All right, I'm going to kick off the BRIC portion of the presentation today. So BRIC is the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities grant program. It's nationally competitive, but there's also a state allocation. And we'll talk about that more in the slides to come. But this is the second year of BRIC, so we're hoping it can be very influential this year. So here's our agenda. It's a packed agenda for sure. But different teammates will speak on different portions of the agenda that they have expertise in. So what we're going to cover today is going to be applicant info, priorities, eligible activities, requirements, funding allocation, as well as key dates and resources. And then if time allows at the end, there'll be a question and answer as well. But like John had mentioned, please drop your questions in the Q&A chat or the actual chat for the meeting. So who is eligible for BRIC funding? Applicants are the 50 states, the U.S. territories, as long as they've had a federally declared disaster within the last 7 years. So thanks to COVID, that makes everyone an applicant. And then the sub-applicants are your local governments, tribal governments, or other state agencies or tribal agencies. And those sub-applicants must have participated and adopted a local hazard mitigation plan. And if you have any questions in regards to whether your community has participated or has not and they've adopted it, please let us know and we can get those questions answered for you. So the program priorities for BRIC this year are to mitigate risk to public infrastructure, incentivize resilient investments in disadvantaged communities, mitigate risk to one or more lifeline, incorporate nature-based solutions, enhance climate resilience and adaptation, and incentivize the adoption and enforcement of the latest published editions of the building codes. The two that are marked with asterisks are new this year, which is the disadvantaged communities as well as the climate resilience and adaptation. And the investment in disadvantaged communities is recognized in Executive Order 14008, which is tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. And with these priorities, FEMA encourages that these projects meet multiple priorities, not just one, but they want to see that this project is going to impact a bunch of people in a positive way. So the funding overview, the Nebraska allocation is $1 million. No more than $500,000 of that can be spent on planning or planning related activities. And then in the national competitive, there's a bunch of money ready to be used for mitigation. And any projects that are over $1 million will be put into the competitive allocation. And those projects that go competitive must be cost effective, increase resiliency and public safety, reduce injuries and loss of life, as well as reduce damage and destruction to property, critical services, facilities, and infrastructure from future disasters. And then they also have a set of qualitative and technical criteria that they have to meet that we will discuss later on in the slides. But as for both allocations, up to 10% of the project funds can be used for information dissemination. And this is things such as public awareness and education, like brochures, workshops, videos, to tell the community what their hazards are and what's going on in the community as well. And I see no questions at this time, so I'll hand the presentation over to John Cook, and he's going to discuss eligible activities and requirements.
Good morning. Some of the eligible activities are consistent with the hazard mitigation grant funding, which is our disaster funding. What they've done also is they've expanded some of those activities to include project scoping and project phasing, pre-award costs, and some additional activities that are related to, wildfire, wind retrofitting, earthquake early warning systems, etc. One of the things that we really like, that we're really wanting to promote, is the project scoping. What it is given the opportunity to do your research, create a project application. So the deliverable at the end would be a project application. And as Katie referred to earlier, in the later iteration, so if you were to do a project scoping project this year, for next year, you'll theoretically get more points and become higher prioritized for funding. Project phasing is another great way to do things. Again, what you're doing is, in your typical phasing of a project, you do the engineering, architectural design, environmental work, so that then you have a project ready to go. Then in phase 2, you would do the actual project itself. So you can get project scoping, and you can also do project phasing, which is a really good way to see if your project is going to be good for various eligibility, which we're going to talk about cost benefit here on the next slide. But the key is that you can get all of this done and you can get paid, as opposed to if you just put in a regular project and say your benefit cost analysis doesn't work. Now your project is no longer eligible and you would have to give back money, potentially give back money. So anyway, the eligible activities is just to whet your, to get your thoughts going as to some potential projects. Next slide, please. Okay, again, let's talk about a little bit more of the phase projects in detail. Phasing project allows money to come into your project development, and you get to look at the community, assuming some risks, and you're still going to get funded even if somewhere down the line you find that your project becomes ineligible. So as a whole, so this is a really good way to figure out you have a very complex kind of a project. Do it a phased project. This is typical of what people do on a large scale project in the real world. First, you have the architectural engineering part, and then once you get everything done, then you can start implementing your actual construction. Next project, next slide, please. Okay. Program requirements. As always, you have to have a hazard mitigation plan. The trick here is the fact that in the past, sometimes a small community could be not have a plan, but would fall underneath the county. That no longer applies. In order for you to be eligible, you have to have participated fully in the mitigation planning process and approve your plan. The other part of this is you need to do a benefit cost analysis. Excuse me, we're going to talk about more details that in just a moment. Sub-applicants must also do what's called the NEPA review, which is the National Environmental Protection Act. There's another slide on this here very shortly. All these requirements are in the NOFO, or the Notice of Funding Opportunity, which we have a link at the end of the slide presentation. One other thing is that if your entity, like a public power district, is outside the state of Nebraska, as long as you have a fully approved mitigation plan and the infrastructure of the project areas within the state of Nebraska, you're still good, as long as you have an accepted mitigation plan. Next slide, please. All right, benefit cost analysis. Federal regulations require that the benefit cost analysis is at least a 1.0 for all construction projects. So for instance, it's going to be kind of hard to do a benefit cost if you're doing a mitigation plan. The key to a good BCA is organizing the documentation that supports your data points that you're putting into the software. FEMA has now moved to 100% using the latest version, which is 6.0. At the end of the slides, there is a resource and there's a link that goes to both the toolkit and some guidance materials that will help you develop your benefit cost analysis. The other part of it is that throughout this entire process, NEMA staff will be there to help you throughout the entire process. One more thing, and then we'll get to the next slide, is that when you're doing your documentation, you want to make it so that anybody can replicate your benefit cost analysis with your data points and supporting documentation underneath it. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us and we'll help you through that. Next slide, please. Okay, so the environmental review is kind of an important thing. There's a list here of all the different regulations and acts. And at the very bottom, there's a EHP checklist. One of the things is that it can be a very daunting task to look at it when you look at the checklist. Again, we'll be here to go through this with you, not just from the standpoint of providing some different contacts and their information, but we'll make sure that everything is going to be in compliant. The other part of this is one of the reasons why this is also, like, for instance, what's in the scoping and the phased is they may give you stipulations that you have to complete either during or at the end of your project. Prime example is when you see power lines with those little weird things on top, those are what's called burr diverters. That's going to be something that will come through the EHP analysis. And so then those burr diverters are something that you can put into your scope of work and into your budget. Next slide, please. Cost share requirements. The slide is here just to help you through this. Most of our HMA guidance applications and program is a 75-25 split, where FEMA is going to reimburse you at 75%. And there's a 25% non-federal share. Now, one of the cool things about doing these cost share is that this is a great way to get other local, state partnerships. One of the things that will give you some added points, which we'll talk about later, is if you can get multiple partners working on this. And the most obvious way to do that is through what we call a local financial commitment letter. So, for instance, if you can get like a nonprofit organization that can help you bring in more people, or providing a resource, that's a way to show that you are bringing in other partnerships. Next thing is the management costs. We have another slide on this, but this is how to administer, mostly it's for administering the project itself. One other thing is that was talked about earlier is the economically disadvantaged rural communities. For those kinds of areas, they don't have necessarily the tax base to be able to provide the 25% cost share. So what you can do is FEMA has decided that they can do a 90-10 split, where it's 90% federal, 10% local non-federal match. In order for you to be designated as an economically disadvantaged rural community is 30,000 fewer residents, and the per capita income cannot exceed 80% of the national average. We can help you with that and identifying if you fall into that category. Next slide, please.
I just want to point out real quick, JB. So we worked with the Department of Economic Development to identify all the communities within Nebraska that meet this criteria, and we're currently drafting letters to all of those jurisdictions. So they will receive a letter directly to let them know that they qualify as an economically disadvantaged rural community. If you do not get a letter but you think you meet this criteria, then please, by all means, reach out to us.
Great point, John. Okay. So let's talk about management costs. BRIC allows a subrecipient to be reimbursed up to 5% of their total award. An example would be if your project total cost is $100,000, 5% of that could be used for management costs, or in other words, $5,000. So what you can do with management costs, you can see here is, again, it's to administer or implement the federal award. When you go to do your application, you'll just provide us a quick explanation for each of the line items. Here, these 6 boxes kind of gives you an idea of what kind of costs are eligible. So for instance, personnel fringe benefits. One of the other things that we can do with BRIC that we can't do for other grant funding is what's called pre-award costs. So what you would do, for instance, if you have a clerk or your treasurer is going to be working on developing an application, what you could do is use the title on a line item budget, use their title. So it would be clerk. And then you put the amount of time that they worked on it, their salary plus fringe benefits, and you multiply that out. That tells us how much money, how much it was for the development of that application. If you have any other people that you're working on, maybe they're doing the EHP work, or maybe they're doing the architectural part of that, you just need to be sure you put those in the line item. If they're pre-award, like I said with the application part, you would just put pre-award and then put the title of the person and the rest of the information. FEMA wants that so that they can understand how much money is going to be needed basically once the project is approved, so that you can get that reimbursed. If your management costs exceed $25,000, FEMA wants a breakdown for how long you think your project is going to go, or 3 years, whichever is less. So if you think your project is going to take 24 months, then they want a breakdown, just a new number. So again, saying your project is $100,000, if you're only going to need 2 years, then you would split that in half, theoretically. If you go any further, you would need to divide that out. Again, kind of like when you're doing the contractual part of this, you'll probably know or have a good estimate as to how much is going to be spent in years 1, 2, and 3. They just want that so it looks like you've got a good idea of how to manage this project. Just make sure I've got everything else. Again, we will help you through this. We've got some templates and stuff like that that can help you through this process. Next slide, please. Okay. Actually, at this point, before I hand it off to Marissa, if there's any questions, please ask now, or you can wait until later. I know this has gone very quickly, but we're doing it at a high level.
Okay, so if you have those questions, please use the Q&A chat or just the regular chat box to type those out, and we will answer them for you. So moving on to direct technical assistance. FEMA will provide non-financial direct technical assistance to up to 20 communities to support the mitigation outcomes outlined on this slide. The goal of direct technical assistance is to help to build the capacity and capability to improve resilience to natural hazards. We aim to engage with stakeholders to create and sustain successful mitigation programs, submit high quality applications, and implement innovative projects to reduce hazard risks. Local governments, including cities, townships, counties, special district governments, and tribal governments may apply. All they have to do is submit that one letter of interest to FEMA, and that is due on 3 p.m. or by 3 p.m. on January 28th of 2022. Next slide, please. Okay, so communities that have not received a project award or advanced assistance under the mitigation grant or under a mitigation grant within the past 5 years, or if they meet any other criteria listed on the slide, may be prioritized by FEMA for a direct technical assistance, especially if they've demonstrated a compelling need, such as having a significant social vulnerability, or if they have had multiple major disaster declarations within the past 5 years. So again, if you represent or know a community or a jurisdiction that meets these criteria, please send in that letter of interest to FEMA. Okay, so now onto the state allocation for Nebraska. So 1 million is available for capacity and capability building activities, project scoping, hazard mitigation planning, and other planning related activities. So these activities are not eligible under the national competition, only under the state allocation. The addition of mitigation projects under the state allocation is a change from BRIC 2020. So capability and capacity building activities must result in a resource, strategy, or tangible mitigation product. We plan to prioritize at least one mitigation project with C and CB activities. So FEMA has provided several supporting documents and resources that outline the eligible activities under each category, which you can find on the FEMA BRIC website. We will identify projects that will fit under the state allocation for mitigation projects once the C and CB activities have been prioritized. All right, so on to planning. 500,000 is available for planning projects. The districts on the slide are not required to apply, but we have 7 total plans expiring in 2025. Therefore, NEMA is attempting to ensure funding for all, and we can't guarantee that there will be enough funding available when all 7 of the plan updates come due once in a few years. So if you choose to participate in BRIC 2021, the project is estimated to be approved and funded by January of 2023. Other jurisdictions are welcome to apply, but these planning areas will have priority. So again, if you have any questions, please type those into the chat. And now I will hand it off to Heather.
All right, thank you, Marissa. Okay, so now I will talk about the national competition. So for any projects that are going to exceed $1 million in the federal share will automatically be put under the national competition for Nebraska. Projects have a limit of $50 million. Thankfully, Nebraska has no limit on how many projects we can submit under this competition. NEMA will prioritize projects that were submitted from previous hazard mitigation assistance grants programs, which would include BRIC 2020 and previous disaster declarations. We will review the potential projects based on the technical and qualitative criteria. And as Lexi said before, up to 10% of the sub-application costs can be used for information dissemination. Next slide, please. So here's the technical criteria that FEMA will use to evaluate all projects. So once FEMA, first they will look at your project and determine if it's eligible. Once they can check that off, they'll go on to the technical criteria. All sub-applications must address these to be competitive. So as you are developing your application, you can use the technical criteria support material. There's a link for that at the bottom, but please use that. The material outlines pretty well how FEMA will evaluate and how they will mark off the different criteria for you. It also explains where in the application you need to provide the different information and any supporting documents that you are required to include. For this year, the mandatory building code adoption requirement will have a tiered point system. And in Nebraska, all the sub-applicants can receive a total of 20 points for that criteria. All of these points are binary, so FEMA will either award you the full points or none. And again, please make sure you refer to that support material while you're developing your application. Next slide. Similar for the qualitative criteria, again, your project must meet all of the criteria that are outlined here. These points are graded on a gradient point system. So your project could receive none, partial, or all the points that are allotted for each criteria. The 4 criteria that are outlined in red, here you must incorporate and acknowledge disadvantaged communities. So you must show how your project will benefit those specifically within those criteria. Again, there is qualitative criteria support material that FEMA has provided. Please, please, please use these when you're developing your application. It's a really good guide. It asks some good questions to provoke thought on how you can meet these criteria and how you can get as many points as possible. Next slide. So here are how disadvantaged communities are defined. So as you can see, it's not always just a specific geographic region. It might be different segments of a population within a larger community. So again, FEMA is going to be prioritizing projects that benefit these communities. And it's important that you acknowledge how you will benefit these communities, because you will score additional points in the qualitative criteria. But I think more importantly, engagement and inclusion of disadvantaged communities will lead to a more impactful mitigation project and increased resilience. So while you are developing your project, it is essential to engage with these community leaders to show how your project will benefit the disadvantaged communities. Next slide. So finally, under the national competition, you are required to include a go, no-go milestone. So this milestone is to assess, when you get to this milestone in your project, you are to assess if your project can go on further, or if maybe you can't go on anymore with your project. And this will be noted in the work schedule of your project, and FEMA will require you to report on the go, no-go milestones in your quarterly progress reports that you would submit if your project is awarded funding. And if you have any questions on that section, you can put it into the chat or the Q&A section, and I will hand it over to John Gassman.
Thank you, Heather. I was just talking to my muted microphone for a moment. As Katie mentioned during the FMA portion, in order to be considered, you will have to submit a notice of interest. Notice of interest it's sort of like a pre-application. It gives us some information, and really what it does is it allows us to take the project to the Governor's Task Force for Disaster Recovery, which is the cross-agency body that prioritizes the use of recovery and mitigation funds for the state. So we're asking you to please submit an NOI for either FMA or BRIC by the 10th of September. And because we are working together, NEMA and DNR, you can send your NOIs for either grant program to the NEMA Hazard Mitigation email. We are going to review those together with Katie and her team to make sure that we find the right grant program for that project. Some key dates, as I said, deadline for NOIs is the 10th. On the 16th is when we will have that meeting with the Governor's Task Force for Disaster Recovery, and that's when we will prioritize the projects that will move forward for a formal application. At the end of the month is when the application window starts. On the 1st of October is when we're going to cut off submission for late NOIs. So if you want to submit, we will consider NOIs that we receive between September 10th and October 1st, but we'll consider them after the prioritized project applications have already started. So we'll make sure that we get the ones that the Governor's Task Force had already looked at. They are good. We'll make sure that everybody's up and running, and then we'll go back and look at any that we received during that time period. So if you missed the September 16th, you're not out of luck. There's still a chance that we can start your work project. Then we are asking that everybody have their sub-applications in by the 17th of December. That's right before the holiday break, so we want to make sure that we have those applications ready to go, because then when everybody's back from the holidays, we'll go through a series of RFIs, getting additional information that we need so that we can submit them at the end of January. So FEMA has set the 26th of January as their deadline to notify them if we have any technical issues that would prevent us from submitting our application. And then the actual application deadline is on the 29th of January. Our goal is to turn everything in by the 26th. We just don't want to take any chances with any technical difficulties. So we are going to work to have everything done and turned in by the 26th. So how do you apply? So we will notify everybody if your NOI was selected to move forward for application development. You'll need to apply for funding using the FEMA Grants Outcome or FEMA Go, which there is a link here on this page. You'll be able to access that in the PDF copy that goes out afterwards. If you go to the FEMA Go website, there are a lot of guides and resources that will show you how to get in and get your account set up. We'll also work hand in hand with you on making sure that that is ready to go before the application window opens. If you need technical support for FEMA Go, there's an email address here. You can also call their help desk. Once again, deadline to get those in to FEMA Go to the state is the 17th. And then we will have everything compiled and turned in at least 24 hours before the federal deadline. Lastly, here are some resources that FEMA has made available. Again, these are all links, and you can find them. You'll be able to use them on the PDF version when it is posted to our website. Some things to point out here: the support materials. They talk about the different project types, and they really give great ideas on things to include in your application. As Heather talked about, the technical and qualitative criteria. We want everybody to address each of those criteria in each application. So please take time, look through those support materials, and see the best way to address those in your application. We are still operating under the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Guidance from 2015. Oh, and the last one I want to point out is the Mitigation Action Portfolio. So this is a resource that has a number of previously successful mitigation projects. So I might give you some ideas on how to incorporate things like nature-based solutions, climate change, partnerships, things like that. But it's a wide range of different mitigation projects from past grant opportunities. And I'll move on to the last one. So I do see a couple of questions in the Q&A, but I'll just say real quick, if you have questions after this, if we don't answer it for you, or if you think about it after you hang up, which always happens to me, please don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us here on the NEMA team or to Katie Ringling at the Department of Natural Resources. You can reach the entire NEMA team if you email to that nema.hazardmitigation@nebraska.gov. That's also where we ask you to send your NOIs. So I have 2 questions here. I'll go ahead and just read them out loud, and we can answer them as a team. If we submitted a sub-application last year, can we basically send the same NOI with any changes in dates as may be required? Yeah, absolutely. And you could also just let us know, whoever your point of contact was for the application last year, that you want to resubmit. We have the applications from last year back in the FEMA Go system, and we are planning to resubmit the applications that went in under the competition for BRIC last year. We're going to resubmit them this year to try again. So if you are interested in doing that, please just reach out to the NEMA point of contact that you worked with last year. It won't be necessary to do an additional NOI because that project will already be prioritized. And then one more here, is the FEMA Go portal the same one used for BRIC 20, or is it new for 21? It is the same. So if you're already in that system, then you'll be able to access it again. You may have to, brush off that password or reset your password to get back in there. If you do not already have a FEMA Go account, then we will make sure you get one before the application window opens. And that's all I see. Nope, Lexi answered that question. Thanks, Lexi. So I don't see any other questions. I want to thank you very much for joining us today. We're all very excited about this opportunity to take some, put some mitigation dollars out on the street and take some mitigation actions across the state. Again, if you have any follow-on questions, if anything occurs to you after the briefing, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And we look forward to working with you all in the future. I'll go ahead and I'm going to stop the recording, but we'll stay on for a few more minutes in case anybody has any additional questions.